In this video, we will make a quick dive into the modern history of private property, what it is and where it comes from. We will see that this concept represents the heart of the issues of inequality and imperialism that plague our civilization, and the way that it is legislated in modern society actually perpetuates the practice of aristocracy that many today believe we purged a long time ago. Nowadays, when talking about private property, we think about any object or possession that is owned by a private individual or group. The idea being that if you own something, you are the only one who gets to decide what to do with it. If you own something, you get to destroy it or throw it away, or use it however you see fit, as long as you're not hurting anyone else in the process. Historically, however, the modern idea of private property originates with the classical liberal tradition of economics and politics. The main difference with the contemporary idea is that, starting in the 18th century, the term was used to refer to the ownership of land and natural resources. John Locke, the father of liberalism, developed the idea that is known as the homesteading principle, according to which one can claim a natural resource as their private property by working on or improving it with their own labor, and therefore performing what he calls an act of original appropriation, a central element of his labor theory of property. Interestingly, in his definition, Locke adds a note that will come to be known as the Lockean proviso. This essentially states that when it comes to claiming things like land from the natural world, the homesteading principle is valid only as long as there is enough of the item left for others to claim. The first time I read it, I thought it was quite interesting. To me, at least, it is not immediately obvious where this proviso comes from. If homesteading land is sufficient to claim it, then what difference does it make how much of it is left? At the same time, it was also pretty obvious that Locke thought it important, since he goes through it multiple times. To understand this, we first need to understand the historical context in which the idea was born. Before the advent of liberalism, the West was dominated by social institutions like monarchy, aristocracy, and the practice of feudalism. All of these ideologies are strictly non-egalitarian. That means that within these frameworks, not all people are born equal. The issue of equality was very different from what is discussed in modern mainstream discourse, and it essentially came down to social class. People were born within a social class, and they almost inevitably died within that class. So these past frameworks of socio-economical organization did not even entertain the idea that people are born with equal moral status. While for liberalism, which incorporated egalitarianism as one of its core values, people had to at least be born with equal worth. And so, for liberal thinkers, creating a just system for the distribution of land and natural resources in society was very important. The reason being that granting the possibility of claiming things like land as private property was believed to lead to the re-emergence of those very same non-egalitarian features typical of those modes of social organization that they fought so hard against. To better understand this idea, let us engage in a thought experiment. A man is shipwrecked on a desert island. To survive, they work the land and live off of their own work. After some time, a second castaway arrives on the island. If we assume that the first man has made use of the whole land available to produce food, what is the second man to do? With no available property to claim, does he beg the first one for food? Does he ask for employment at whatever condition the first man offers, essentially becoming a slave, since he has no bargaining power whatsoever, given that the first man has control of every resource on the island? The result is a sort of first-come, first-served system, where early birds claim all resources available, at which point they can just live off of the work of other men in exchange for access to the resources they need to be productive. This example helps us understand why the Lockean proviso is so important and why ownership of natural resources cannot really be compared to claim of ownership to other things like capital or the services that we produce. After all, natural resources exist independently of human action, unlike labor or capital. While for some of us, this is an idea that is mostly remembered as being associated with the work of Henry George, this is a point that virtually all other classical economists agree on. Even early leftist thinkers, though they diverge strongly on other topics, they agreed with this starting principle. In summary, land ownership, as well as ownership of natural resources in general, isn't exactly ownership in the common sense of the word, but it is essentially a monopoly. When we own a plot of land, not only we unjustly claim the natural value of the land as our own, even though that value was not created by us, but we also exclude everyone else from receiving that value. And since land exists in limited amount, this leads to the formation of monopolies. One could claim that even today in developed countries, there still exists vast amount of unused land. However, this ignores the fact that land is a heterogeneous resource. An acre of land in New York City is valued very differently than an acre of land in the middle of the desert. So while the observation is true that large amount of unused land are still available, the vast majority of land value has already been claimed virtually everywhere on Earth, with very few exceptions. On top of that, in modern society, land value is mostly the result of human activity. In a modern city, land is extremely valuable due to proximity to goods and services produced by other people, as well as large amount of infrastructure work. In this context, land ownership is really not too different from theft. You claim for yourself wealth that was made by others. When thinking about the issue of land monopoly, it is really no surprise that in societies of the past, land ownership was something reserved and exclusive only to special classes, like the nobility or the clergy. Before the modern era, members of high society incorporated the concept of land ownership into their very name, thus linking themselves to their surrounding geographical areas and polities. The nobles, therefore, lived off of land rent, and their wealth was the product of the work of the masses, which, ironically, were their subjects. Today, things haven't changed too much. In the US, about half of all real estate is owned by the top 10% of earners, and the wealthiest people on earth own up to half of their net worth in real estate and other forms of land ownership and monopoly. The truth is that land ownership without a system that returns ground rent to the people is simply incompatible with a just market economy. As long as we have to deal with private land ownership, aristocracy will, in fact, continue to exist, since its essence, extracting wealth from the labor of others, does not depend on the existence of things like noble titles, but on the capacity to appropriate the products of nature. Throughout the history of man, land ownership has always been the foundation of aristocracy and the ultimate source of power.